I continue to read the biography of Walter Lippmann by Ronald Steele. Chapter 27, A Gate Unlocked. I'm like a man who has seen in his mind's eye the glories of this existence, but had wandered through endless corridors, looking into empty rooms, till suddenly you unlocked the gate to the real world. To Helen Armstrong, May 29, 1937. Despite the great success of his column and the handsome income of some $60,000 a year it provided, Lippmann had grown a bit bored with it. Ever since he started Today and Tomorrow, he had been besieged by other offers. In 1931, to do a column for Harper's or be editor of the Washington Post. In 1933, to take over the American Mercury. In 1934, to be the professor at Columbia, Amherst, and Harvard, or to become a salaried columnist for the Atlantic. He was often tempted, but he never acted. Despite his complaints about the tyranny of newspaper work, he could never quite bring himself to break with the column. In the spring of 1936, he told Ellery Sedgwick, editor of the Atlantic, that he would certainly stop his newspaper column by the fall and accept the magazine's offer to do 10 long articles a year for $1,000 each. But there was always a good reason to delay a little longer. A European trip to make, a political crisis to contend with. The column was demanding, but it offered him an influence and a position of power he could never have enjoyed as a magazine writer or professor. Still, he was restless. Dissatisfaction with the column was a part of a larger disaffection in his life. He had written a preface to Morals, with its prescription of disinterestedness, partly as an effort to deal with that disaffection. On an intellectual level, it had worked, yet the formula left him with the anxiety he could not clearly identify or remedy. Much of the problem was his marriage. He and Thea had never had much in common, and when the romance cooled after a few years, there was little left but habit and convenience. Many people like him had discovered, as he wrote more revealingly than he intended in a preface to Morals, that as the glow of a passion cools, it is discovered that no instinctive and preordained affinity is present. End quote. His solution there was to call it quits or to make the best of it. Hating confrontation, not sure that anything else would be better, he chose the latter. For the most part, he and Thea had a perfectly acceptable marriage. No worse, it seemed, than those of many people they knew. And there were compensations. For her, the winters at the beach house in Florida, the summers at Wading River, the comfortable townhouse on East 61st Street, the Broadway first nights, the fashionable restaurants, the famous people Walter attracted and was attracted by. For him, the work he enjoyed, the encounters with the movers and the shakers of the world, the yearly trips to Europe, the recognition, and the applause. Their life was not a bad one, as such things went. There seemed no pressing reason to change it. Many people, in a marriage gone stale, cast their eyes around for an easy dalliance. Certainly enough of their friends had, often with one another. Thea, still attractive and ready for that dancing playmate. Mabel Dodge years earlier had wished she would have chosen instead of Walter, did not seem unattainable. Walter was. He had never been the kind of a person to enter lightly into affairs, or enter into them at all. Though he had many opportunities, even guarded invitations from mutual friends, he had resolutely turned them aside. Infidelity was not part of his moral code. Children might have drawn them together, but they never had any of their own. Walter, at the beginning, had expressed anxieties about the problems facing offspring of a mixed marriage. And when Jane Mather entered their lives, she became the child they did not and need not have. Not strongly absorbed in his marriage, Walter found comfort in his work and his friends. Of all the people in his social world, none did he enjoy so much as Hamilton, Fish, Armstrong, and his wife, Helen. They had been good friends since the late 1920s. They dined together in the city, visited each other's country homes, and even toured Egypt and the Mediterranean in 1934. Walter and Hamilton sat together at meetings of the Council on Foreign Relations, lunched once or twice a week at the Century Club, spoke on the phone nearly every day. Their friends referred to them as Damon and Phileas. Armstrong was a most engaging man, with a charm and personal warmth that Lippmann found highly appealing. He also basked in the admiration Armstrong showed upon him. Isaiah Bowman, who had resented Lippmann ever since their days together at the inquiry, described Armstrong's attitude as idolatry. He said, "I have never seen anyone so crazy over another individual, so reliant upon another's judgment, and so foolish in this admiration." End quote. Lippmann enjoyed the company of both Armstrongs. Often he would drop by their house on East 81st Street after dinner, especially when Thea was away at Wading River or in Florida. He had developed a particular attraction to Helen. She had a shrewd intelligence, a sharp tongue, and a quick wit. Unlike Thea, she was interested in politics and asked questions that engaged his mind and activated his talent for exposition. Neither blonde nor bosom like Thea, she was slight and well-proportioned in a way, as Lippmann once told her of an adolescent boy. She had short brown hair, darting eyes, a quick temper, and an inquisitive mind that ranged voraciously over politics, literature, and the arts. From her Catholic father and her early training in a convent, she had developed an intolerance of priests and religion, and having left the church early, never returned. Her education had been expensive and protective, first at a Catholic convent in Belgium, then at the austerely Episcopal and eminently proper Miss Champion's school in Manhattan. Like most women of her generation and social class, she did not go to college, nor did it occur to her to have a career. In 1918, after finishing school, she went to Paris as a nurse aide with the Red Cross. There, she was placed under the watchful supervision of her family's friend, Edith Wharton. Following the armistice, she married Hamilton Armstrong, a young journalist from a distinguished New York family, in the Church of Saint Roch in Paris. Helen was brought up with a taste for comfort and a sense of public service. Her father, James Brain, had become very wealthy as a legal counsel for General Motors and provided his family with a life appropriate for their station. A townhouse in Manhattan, an estate on Long Island, and a spacious summer camp at Bar Harbor, Maine. Each child received a sizable trust fund and could live very comfortably from the income. A public-spirited man, James Brain served as president of the New York Bar Association and was the first Catholic elected to the Harvard Board of Overseers. Loyal to the university, he endured the chair in administrative law that for many years was held coincidentally by Felix Frankfurter. Helen was her father's daughter in many ways. She had the Irish temper, the charm, the gift for talk, the high-strung sensibility. She also knew how to listen, which made it easy for essentially shy men like Walter to talk to her. At a dinner party in January 1937, having known each other for more than a dozen years, they fell into a conversation, quite without his knowing how, about love and marriage. Nothing personal was said, but as they separated, Helen touched his hand lightly and looked into his eyes, a gesture he did not find easy to forget. A few days later, he went to Florida to put the finishing touches on The Good Society, the book he was writing. Though he did not return to New York until April, he spent a good deal of time thinking about Helen. As soon as he got back to New York, Thea had decided to stay on at Anna Maria for a few weeks. He dropped by to see the Armstrongs and to show them the just completed draft of his book. During the next 2 weeks, he dined with them several times and lunched separately with Hamilton at the Century Club. One afternoon in May, Hamilton called to say he had to attend a meeting that night at the council. He hated to leave Helen alone. Would Walter mind taking her somewhere to dinner? This seemed natural among old friends, but Walter was uncharacteristically nervous as he picked up the phone and asked Helen to dine with him that evening. Wanting the occasion to be festive, he suggested the Rainbow Room, the fashionable skyscraper restaurant in the newly constructed tower of Rockefeller Center. Helen welcomed the chance to see Walter alone. She found him attractive, as many women did, with his solid build kept in good shape by regular workouts at the gym, abundant dark hair, violet-flecked hazel eyes, and prominent cheekbones. He was a most desirable companion. His international fame added to that desirability. Though Helen, like many women, had long found Walter attractive, she had always thought him too serious for dalliance. Yet, since reading a preface to Morals, she had realized that he was far more complex than the high-minded and the slightly aloof man who wrote earnestly of political affairs. The book spoke powerfully of love and marriage and fortitude. When he wrote that love endures only when the lovers love many things together and not merely each other, he seemed to be speaking undeniable truth. And his plea for a mature disinterestedness seemed to illuminate a path for surmounting life's tribulations. Helen had always assumed that Walter was the supremely adjusted man he described in his book. But as they sat together on that warm spring night early in May, the lights of the city forming a jeweled backdrop through the wall of windows, the orchestra playing melodies from the new Fred Astaire singer Roger's film, Shall We Dance? She found a different man from the one she had known. The music, the lights, the dancing couples floating past their table, the metallic brilliance of the Art Deco furnishing lent a strange excitement to the evening. Helen, for once, seemed utterly subdued. Each seemed to be waiting for the other to take the lead. Finally, Walter took the initiative. Seized by an overwhelming compulsion, he began to talk of his feelings, and in a way he had never spoken to anyone. He began by telling her of his doubts about the value of the column and his temptation to quit daily journalism to write articles and books, and perhaps to teach. Feeling that she understood what he was trying to say, he lowered the barriers he had so carefully erected over the years. He spoke of the space he felt between himself and other people, and how, although he had never had any desire to be psychoanalyzed, this probably came from a childhood in which he felt unloved. For the first time in his life, he revealed his loneliness in growing up in a household of uncaring servants and of parents too preoccupied with themselves to give him much attention. He told her how neglected he felt and unloved by his mother, and of how this feeling had put a chill on his emotions and made him afraid of getting really close to anyone. He had talked about his life with Afia, how their marriage had become a habit, devoid of a passion or even of a real affection, how lonely he had felt with Afia, even lonelier than being by himself, and how this made him pull back yet further into himself. His prescription for disinterestedness in a preface to Morals was, he revealed, in part, a way of dealing with that unhappiness. When he had written that lovers who have nothing to do but love each other are not really to be invaded, love and nothing else very soon is nothing else. He had been referring to his own marriage. Helen was not obtuse. For years, she had sensed the tension between Walter and Faya, wondered what it was that had brought them together. Of course, she had never said anything. Now she realized that he had thrown down a barrier in speaking to her this way. He was treating her not as a confidant, but as a woman. He was bringing her into his life. A sense of complicity had grown between them. He had allowed her into an inner sanctum where no one had ever before penetrated. He wanted something from her without quite knowing what it was. She didn't know. She listened gravely, asked questions delicately, softly laid her hand on his. They drank more wine than they were used to. They danced on the crowded floor, holding each other closer than they ever had before. By the time they left the Rainbow Room, and he hailed a cab on Fifth Avenue to take her home, they both knew that something irrevocable had happened. The next day he called her. They arranged to have dinner again on a night when Hamilton would be away. This time not in a fashionable spot where he was easily recognized, but in a quiet neighborhood restaurant. The relationship had changed. Their meeting had an air of a conspiracy. During the 20 years of his marriage, nothing like this had ever happened. Now, for the first time in his life, the rules seemed suspended. They held hands during the dinner and spoke wonderingly over the strange thing happening to them. When they left the restaurant, they went to a hotel. They met again the next day and the next. With their affair fully launched, Helen decided that they should have a place to meet freely whenever they could get away. She rented a small furnished apartment on East 95th Street, in the block between Park and Madison. They met there nearly every afternoon. The location was hardly prudent for a triest. Many of their friends lived nearby. They could easily have been recognized. One evening at a dinner party, having come straight from a rendezvous with water on the flat, Helen was astounded when learned hand, who was seated next to her, turned and said, "How well do you know Walter Lippmann?" Taken aback, she mumbled non-committal, "Why? You know we have been friends with the Lippmanns for years." "Well, my dear," Hans said, his bushy black eyebrows setting off his piercing glance, "I'm sure then you realize that despite his impassive front, he is really a highly sensitive person. Don't do anything to hurt him." Her face flushing, Helen protested she was hardly in a position to hurt him. The judge smiled and changed the subject. Their secret posed enormous complications for their public lives. After a late afternoon rendezvous, Helen and Walter would often find themselves with their respective spouses at the same gathering in the evening, trying to strike the right tone of casualness, to remember how they had spoken before everything had changed. This ensembling was not easy for him, but he learned. He even learned how to put on a front with Hamilton, whom he continued to see nearly as often as he saw Helen. It pained him to have to deceive his friend, but he was too caught up in the excitement of the liaison to brood about it. Time seemed very short. Helen was leaving for Europe at the end of May with Hamilton and their 13-year-old daughter, Gregor. The Armstrong were to spend June in Dubrovnik, July in Slovenia, and the Austrian Alps. Hamilton would return to New York at the end of July. Helen and Gregor would stay on another month with friends in the south of France. The prospect of a 3-month separation seemed intolerable to Walter. Their furtive love affair had begun only a few weeks earlier. Okay, I stop here for the first part.